For today's Writing Bites video, I have special guest Jason Fowler. Jason is a professional illustrator, graphic designer, and now a self-published author. Jason and I will talk about his self-publishing journey for Max and the No Good Rotten Worst Birthday Party of All Time, a 30-page picture book for ages 2 to 6. Jason Fowler, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let me start first here with just the basic question. What led you to write and illustrate your own book? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, like a lot of interesting things in life, it just happened purely by accident. Now, drawing is something I always did since I was a kid. I used to draw like video games and cartoon characters and stuff like that. I did art classes in school. And when I went to college, I didn't know what to do. And I somehow became a studio art major. So I've done art my whole life. And then at a certain point, I became a freelancer. So I was doing screen printing and stuff like that. And my first child was about to be born. And I said, you know what? I've always wanted to go out on my own, start my own business. I'm just going to do it right now before my kid's born and before my time just evaporates. So I started doing freelancing, which included a lot of freelance illustration. So I would make T-shirts for people or, just images, spot illustrations, all kinds of stuff like that. And my in-laws, my wife, her family, they own an art supply store. And one day a guy came into the store and he said, I've got this story that I've written, but I need illustrations. I need artwork. Do you guys know anybody who could do something like that? So it was funny because I just happened to be in the store. I never go into the store, but I was in the store that day. It's funny how coincidences, just happen. And so I talked to the guy and sat down and, he read his story to me and blah, blah, blah. And like, okay, well, let's work on this. I've never done a book before, but that sounds like a lot of fun. So I worked on this book with him and it sort of turned into a partnership thing. So instead of him just paying me to work on the book, we sort of became partners with it and it became both of our projects. And we tried to we even set up a little business entity and we tried to sell this book. We didn't know what we were doing at all. And through this whole process of like just meeting people and trying to sell this book, he introduced me to this book publisher. We met, she liked my artwork, and then she just started throwing me books to work on. So I just started working on books for other people, illustrating their books. That's how it happened, through this random public. She doesn't even live here. She lives in Florida. She was just in town. And the guy I was working with was in a restaurant and he overheard her speaking to someone in the background about books. He was like, oh, you publish books. I've got a book I want to talk to you about. And then that's how I met her. So it's just this crazy chain of coincidences that had me introduced to this woman who then started giving me books to illustrate. And I've been illustrating them ever since. I guess that was about four years ago, something like that.
And what is that book publisher again?
That's called Pepper Tree Press. It's a small, it's sort of a self-publishing thing where like you pay them to expedite the process. Like they help you edit, they put you together with an artist, they give you some limited distribution and stuff like that.
And so were you illustrating for some of the self-published authors that were working with her press?
Yeah, they'd come in and she had a portfolio of artists and they'd pick one. And then so sometimes they would pick me to work with.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you were working a lot on, say, commissions, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you have this background, you're working on commissions with this press. You've worked with this author who you were able to meet through the art supply studio that you work at, or the art supply store you work in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't work in it. It's my wife's store, but I was there.
You were there.
And actually, it's funny because people are like, wow, an artist, you married someone who owns an art supply store. It's like, yeah, it's perfect. I didn't plan it. It just happened.
But, but the thing is, you have this background where you have this graphic design portfolio. So I'm going to ask another question. How important was the portfolio for you of having all this work that you've done from at the very beginning to now?
Do you mean like how important was it that I had done a lot of work before I worked on a book?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, it makes all the difference in the world, because if you come into, like, if you say, wow, I want to write a book, and you are an author, but you have zero experience with graphics and illustration, your experience of self-publishing is going to be way different than mine because, like you said, I'm an illustrator and a graphic designer. I went to school and I've done it on my own for years. It's my job. So I understand how to use all the software. I understand I can format the book by myself and I make all the illustrations myself. So it's vastly different being able to do those things. More important than, not more important, but if you don't have a background in doing design, so it's good if you have an eye for it. You and I were talking before we started rolling about thumbnails for videos and stuff like that. And they say, don't judge a book by its cover. Totally wrong. 100% wrong. Go to a bookstore and look at all the books on the shelves. And it's like, how am I supposed to pick what to read? I did that when I went to the beach last time. I was like, I'm just going to pick a random book and read it. And you go there and the wall is covered. And like, I have no way to differentiate between any of this stuff. And your book is the same. So how are you going to stand out? Well, one way is by having a really good cover and to look professional. It's not just that it needs to be good. It's that it's got to look like a professional book. Barcode needs to be this size and it needs to be here. And your text needs to be about this size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just needs to look like a well put together product. Because people will look at your book and instantly form a judgment like, oh, that's amateur, or oh, that's pro. So if you got an eye for that, you can look at something like, yeah, that looks professional and that doesn't. That's going to help you a lot.
So what was your vision in writing this book? Like what brought you to writing this book?
Well, I'll tell you what I did. It's actually my second book. So I wrote the first book 2 years before, which is called Dance and Play the Animal Way. And my background is in illustration more than writing, but I wanted to write a book. So I thought, well, I'll do a children's book because there are fewer words and it's simpler. And it's something that I actually have written a lot, but stuff like blogs and content like that, not books per se. So I thought if I start with a children's book, that's much more manageable for me. Plus I'm a cartoonist, so it makes sense to make that kind of material anyway. And that's the kind of stuff I was working on previously. So one of the reasons I even decided to do a book to start with is because I was working on tons of other kids' books for other people. And at a certain point, you're like, wow, I could do this. And I think I could actually do it better than a lot of the stuff that I'm working on. So it's like a challenge to yourself, like, wow, I just really want to try this and do it for myself. So to get back to your question, why did I write this particular story? I felt like it was time to write another book. And so what I did was I got this idea from a guy and he said, just get a piece of paper and every day write down 10 ideas about something. So I adapted that to my book. I thought, I don't know what I want to write about, but every day I'm just going to get a piece of paper and just write 10 story ideas. And I did that for a week and a half. And I just had these pages full of story ideas. And I picked the one that I liked the best, which turned into this story about Max. So it was just trial and error. I just went through all these story ideas, and that was the one that I liked, that resonated with me, that seemed like it would be the most fun to work on.
So you said that was the idea that stood out.
Yeah.
Well, why did it stand out to you?
People write books for different reasons. Okay. So some people have a message, or some people want to help kids understand something or get through whatever. I want my books to be fun more than anything. Now, I do have messages in my books, and I have what I consider to be a pretty important message in this book, but it's not front and center. It's something that you pick up on maybe, or you can read the whole book and just enjoy it and never even think about it. But more than anything, I wanted my books to be fun because I have a lot of books on the bookshelf that my kids read, that I read to my kids. And a lot of them are too long, or they're boring, or they're weirdly heavy for a little kid. And I just wanted to be something fun and funny that a parent would enjoy reading, something interactive, and that a kid would read it and would laugh at it. This is so much fun. So I think that was what appealed to me about the idea. I wanted a character that I can use over and over again, and a concept that was a lot of fun. And this was the one that just seemed to check all the boxes. The book is about this kid named Max. He's about 8 years old. And he is excited because his best friend has invited him to his birthday party. So All week, he's thinking about the birthday party. He's thinking about all the cake and ice cream and all the games they're going to play and just how perfect it's going to be. And he wakes up Saturday morning. They go to the party. He gets there, and it just everything goes wrong. Everything that could possibly goes wrong goes wrong. And this thing that he had built up in his mind all week to be perfect turns into a complete disaster. But it's the story of this kid whose expectations were just completely dashed. And it's just an excuse to, have a slapstick, funny story of a lot of physical comedy.
We kind of went over this a little bit in the background, but when did you feel confident you could complete this project?
Since I had done a book before, I had gone through the process once. I learned a lot the first time. By this point, I started off just illustrating books, but at this point, I was now formatting books for other people, which, if you don't know, means not only do I make the illustrations, but I put all the text in, make sure the margins are correct, add the barcode, the copyright information, all that stuff. The most important parts of creating a good book and a good illustration is revision. I understood that I was going to write the script and rewrite it as many times as it took, and that I was going to draw the pictures and rework them as many times as it took until it was good. And if it wasn't good, I wouldn't put it out. That's fine.
And that kind of leads into our next question, which is how many drafts did you complete? Like, when did you feel like, okay, this is, I could show this to someone else. I think it's ready.
I rewrote the story at least 5 or 6 times. And that was after I got once I got the initial concept, I knew basically what was going to happen. I rewrote the actual script at least 5 or 6 times. And that probably doesn't include all the times you go in and you're like, well, let me change this line and let me scratch that out. And, like the little edits that you end up making. So I rewrote it a bunch of times. And actually, I completed the entire book. And I was just about to start the printing process. And something was just bugging me. And I started thinking like, man, if I'm having these feelings before I even have the book printed, I'm going to feel bad forever. Like trying to market this thing, trying to sell this thing, trying to sell it to people. And I actually ended up going back and redoing all the artwork and rewriting the script again.
Mm-hmm.
So the book was done. All the artwork was completely finished. I could have sent it to a printer and then I just started over and did it again. But I'm really glad I did because the art style changed between those 2 drafts. And the story is way better, I think, going through that last round of polish.
Let's get into the self-publishing part of this process. You've worked with, traditional publishers. You worked with this press that kind of helps self-publishers. What pushed you to self-publishing over traditional publishing?
But what you have to understand about traditional publishing is a couple things. Number one, it's a very long process. So unless you unless you have some sort of an in, or you really know somebody at a big publisher that wants to publish your work or something like that, it takes months and years to get anybody interested in your work most of the time. And you need an agent who's out there representing your stuff, because you can't just send your stuff to Penguin, or Scholastic and just send them an email and say, hey, I got this thing. You guys interested in publishing it? That's not how it works. You have an agent send it to them, and then they'll get back to you, 6 months, a year, never, who knows? And you just got to keep sending it out until you finally get someone who's interested in publishing your work. So traditional publishing is a long-term process, and you just got to be comfortable with that to start. And since I had been working with a lot of basically self-publishers, I guess I just wanted to do that. The pros of self-publishing, theoretically, you keep more money if you sell books. It's also a more personal process. Like, you're in charge of everything. You do it all, which is either terrifying or exciting, depending on your personality. You have complete control over the product, the marketing, and everything. I think at the time, in a way, it seemed easier, and not easier, but more accessible. Like, I can self-publish right now.
So, well, and you kind of hinted at this. So let me kind of have you expound, skipping ahead to some questions. What were some of the pros of self-publishing? What were some of the, if you're going to recommend self-publishing, what would you recommend about it? And if you're going to turn someone away from it, how would you turn them away from it?
I would probably try to talk you out of it, honestly, to start with. And here's why: because the creative process is great. You can't beat the creative process of self-publishing. Well, All right, let me qualify that. You have complete control, which could be good or bad, because the good thing about a traditional publisher is they have a team to help you. You've got editors. You've got professionals who know what a cover is supposed to look like. They know how to market. And if you don't have access to these professionals, you have to do it all yourself. So the pros of self-publishing are, number one, it's very accessible. Anybody can do it anytime. If you've got the money to spend and you got a story, you can self-publish today. All you got to do is send Lulu or BookBaby or Digipod or whoever your story, and they will print it for you. The cons of self-publishing are that it's a ton of work, because unless you have a big budget to spend on marketing and professionals to help you edit, etc., you've pretty much got to do it all by yourself, which means you've got a lot to learn. Now, some people love to do that. Some people love to dive in and learn how to market and set up their website. They like to get out there and go to festivals and do book signings. So you have to set all this stuff up, because the real work starts after your book is finished. You know, that's just the beginning of the process. You actually have the book in your hand. Now you got to get it out there and get people to read it, because that's the whole point.
You have this experience. What else were you using to kind of research or aid in that self-publishing process?
Well, fortunately, there are a lot of internet resources. So there are tons of websites you can Google it and see what people have to say about publishing. And you can go to YouTube and watch lots of videos about publishing. You can take courses if you want to and buy books. There's no shortage of material from people who've gone through it. And then I also talked to a few people who I've worked with who have self-published books. Since I've worked with self-publishers, I know a little bit about the process just through working with them. But a lot of it is too, you just got to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you learn the most by just pulling the trigger and trying to publish a book.
If you were going to recommend a skill, or let's say like a webinar or class that someone interested in self-publishing would teach, what would you recommend them learn?
I think the best thing you can learn is how to market.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably one of the things that creative people don't like to do because it seems awful, especially when you don't understand anything about it. So learning how to market. And what I mean by that is learning how to both put your book out in front of people and to get them to actually buy it. How do you run ads if you want to do that? How do you set up an appealing website? If you sell your book on your website, how do you set up a store? And how do you anybody can make an ugly, useless website, but how do you make something that works? And how do you set up interviews? And how do you set up all these events, promote them in advance? Like, you're going to do a book signing, but you want people to come to your book signing. So how do you make the signs, and how do you get the word out, and who do you speak to, and et cetera, and all this stuff? Anyway, marketing. How to market your book is probably, I would say, the number one most important skill you can have, besides just making it.
How did you market your book? What were some of the marketing routes that you took that worked, and what were some that didn't?
Well, I can tell you some things I've done, and I don't feel like a marketing expert, but I'm still learning this stuff myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of experimenting, you would say. So that's the way I approach it. Everything is an experiment. You learn from it whether it works or not. So, if you do something and it's a miserable failure, that's okay. Either you didn't do it right, or you don't do that anymore. So stuff that I've done, you got to do a book signing. When you're a new author, the people who are going to buy your stuff are the people who know you, family, friends, etc. The first 50, 25, 175, whatever copies are just going to be people who know you. So you got to do a book signing to start with. I did that. Those are always very successful because the people who know you come out to support what you're doing. You can do things like read at school. Now, I do a children's book. So people who have other types of stories will have to adapt this advice. If you have an adult story, or what's nice is if your book is related to some sort of cause that you're interested in. So I worked with a lady who wrote a book about autism. And the whole point of the book was to educate, spread awareness about autism. And so your marketing is sort of built into your book. You're going to go to, you're going to approach groups that that have the same cause, and you're going to market your book that way. But if your book is just some entertaining story like what mine is, I mean, I'm not behind the cause of birthday parties or something like that. I just wrote a fun book. So I do things like I go read at schools, preschools and schools. My book is for about 2 to 6, 2 to 8, something like that. So I'll go read my book to a classroom of kindergartners, first graders, second graders, preschoolers. And often the school will buy books, or they will allow me to send a slip of paper home with the students and give them the opportunity to buy books, which honestly is very hit or miss. Like sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. I've done things like go to a summer camp, for instance, and participate in their program. You'll read your book one day, and in exchange, they'll give the students an opportunity to buy your book, which when I did that worked very well. I have a website which I set up, which websites it's a whole other art form, and it can be a super slog. But if your website is good, it can be incredible. So I don't actually sell my book on Amazon at all. I only sell it on my website, which is great because you can, people want to buy online. So you can go on Facebook or whatever you use, and you can advertise your book, and people can go there and buy their book from your site. You can go to festivals and stuff like that. I haven't had a ton of success with festivals. Usually you just end up sitting there all day and you sell a few copies of your book, but who knows? It depends on the festival, depends on your book. It depends on a lot of things. There are tons of events where you can be a vendor that you can go to, set up. And sometimes those can be absolutely fantastic. Again, right book, right place, right event, et cetera, et cetera. I'm experimenting right now with using traffic, like paid traffic to my website. But that means I have to set the website up so that it works that way. There's a website that people just go to learn about you. And then there's a website that people go to that actually causes them to want to buy your book. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Couple of follow-ups here. So one, how are you reaching out to these festivals, vendors, schools? Are you just cold emailing them, or do you know someone connected to those schools?
Both. Yeah. Sometimes somebody, you ask, but I just send emails out or call and say, hey, I'm so and so. I've got this book. It's for these kids this age. I would love to come read to your classroom. That's it.
Now, how used to rejection should a self-published author be?
Probably vary, because most people aren't going to buy your book. I sent out tons of messages to schools, and most of them I got no reply. So I guess that's rejection, but that's no big deal. Nobody comes up to me and says, oh, this is terrible. I don't want your stupid book. The kind of rejection you get is just being ignored. But that's the hard part of self-publishing and doing a book anyways, that most people don't care about your book. That's why it's family and friends who buy from you, because they care about you.
So you were talking about the routes of success.
Yeah.
How much of the route of success is just basically you being present, you basically, I guess, promoting you?
That's the hardest thing in the world. And it actually applies to everything, especially social media, all the stuff that we do now is consistency. When you say showing up, that's what I'm thinking of, consistency. And by that, I mean, anybody can, you put your book out and you're really excited about it. So for a month, you're out there talking about it. But what happens in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year? Most of the time, your book just kind of disappears, and the author just kind of stops promoting it, and it's like it never happened. I think your success comes from consistently over time continuing to promote, talk about your book. If you got something else coming up, let people know, and do this every day. And what's weird about it is people are going to get really tired of hearing me talk about this all the time. It's like, well, no. If you know how social media works, most people don't see anything you say anyway. And the ones who do forgot about it 15 minutes after they saw it. So don't worry about it. The best thing you can do is just consistently, every day, promote your project, promote your book, find a new way to talk about it, and just continue to let people know, because people don't often buy things the first time they hear about it. They have to hear about it 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, which sounds, in your mind, if you're not used to promoting yourself, you're like, gosh, I just keep going on and on and on about the same things. Yeah, but that's how people work. They need to be exposed to your book many, 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 many times before they actually might. They need to be, it needs to hit them at the right time on the right day in the right mood. Maybe they saw you talk about your book 20 times, but then the 21st time it's like, well, my niece has a birthday party next weekend and I don't know what to get them. This would be perfect. And then you sold the book because you kept talking about it. So like you say, consistently showing up in people's worlds in some way. They see you, they see your book, they see you at events, they see that you're offering a promotion, they see that you're working on a new book, they see that you're giving a talk, they see that you're reading at a school. All this stuff constantly and consistently over time is going to be the key to success, I think.
Follow-up question I was finally meaning to ask is you chose to not work on Amazon. I think
Yeah.
a lot of self-published authors, that's a very uncommon choice. What made you choose that?
Well, at first I was like, I'm just going to do it on my own website because I want people to come to my site. I don't want to send people to Amazon. That was my first thought. And then for this book, I thought, you know what? I want to put it on Amazon because I want to try that whole thing. Because there's a whole art to that too, like getting reviews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, just getting book reviews is like the hardest thing of all time. It is almost impossible to get someone to review your book. If you're like me and you don't know whether you should get something, you look at the stars and you look at how many people reviewed it. It stinks to have your book up there with a big goose egg 0 next to it. So you got to figure out a way to get all your friends and your family and people who bought the books to actually review the book. Try to get on Amazon and I'm having a problem with it. Some paperwork or something. I don't know. And I can't speak to a human. Amazon customer service. I hope I'm not stepping on toes here, but Amazon customer service is terrible. I would love to be on Amazon right now, but we're having problems. So maybe we'll work that out in the future.
So let's talk about maybe the review process, going back to like you're writing the book. One of the things that I talk about with writers is, there's this drafting process and you've got friends who are helping out you. And then, if you were on a traditional route, you have editors and so forth. On a self-publishing route, you don't have an editor who's kind of reading and helping you. So what was your review process like?
You can pay for that if you want to. Now, the thing about self-publishing is you can get anything done if you're willing to pay for it. So there are editors out there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my review process, I have a background in writing, kind of know what good writing looks like, at least on a real basic level, how not to sound clumsy, prose that sounds good. The review process for me was writing a draft and then letting it sit because you need a little time. Going back and reading it and saying, does this make sense? Does this sound clumsy? Am I getting bored at any point? I have a few writer friends I would send drafts to. I would let my wife read it. And most importantly, I would try to find people like I have my cousin is married to a woman who pulls no punches. She will tell you exactly what she thinks about everything. So in this case, it was good. I've sent her my manuscript because I want people like that reading it. I want people who will most people are not going to tell you if something stinks, but you need people like that in your life to say, yeah, this makes no sense, or the wording here is whatever, or I'm falling asleep or something like that. So I did send it out to quite a few people to solicit some feedback, but it was basically just time and rewrites and just my own, I guess it's your own internal feeling. That's what makes the process difficult as well, because what is your taste and what is your own internal quality meter telling you about your book? If that's off, you're in trouble. You got to know what good writing sounds like. That's a tough one.
I think you bring up a good point because I think a lot of writers broadly, I think a lot of artists, a lot of people working interested in creative work, I don't think they realize the importance of actually working on that craft.
Yeah.
And also being someone who develops a sense of taste from prolifically engaging in the craft and being able to successfully mimic it.
And I had the advantage too of working on I've worked on a lot of par material.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've read a lot of children's books. When you work on a lot of people's material, you start forming theories about things anyway. It's like, well, this was clumsy. This was weird. And you start making a checklist in your mind. Okay, this is good. This is bad. This is good. This is bad. So experience working on other people's stuff is really helpful too. You should probably read a lot if you want to write. You should read a lot of good stuff. But you should also read it. My advantage is, if you're just a person reading books, you're going to read the best books because that's the only stuff that you're going to find on a shelf. But I got to read a lot of bad stuff, which is equally helpful in a different way. Also, you just need to know basic stuff about stories. Because something's clear in your mind does not mean it's clear in the person's mind who's reading your story. It's simple things like introducing your characters, not being too complicated. Keep it focused. Things like having a conflict. Some story, believe it or not, some stories I read have no conflict or problem. And it's like, it's hard to have a story if there's nothing to overcome.
You mentioned, you can get whatever you want if you're willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
What was your engagement with contractors? What did you contract some of the things for?
Fortunately, I don't. It would be nice to have a huge marketing budget because I would love to pay people to just market, and so I could do all the creative stuff. I don't have that. Fortunately, as we mentioned earlier, I have a long history of graphic design and illustration, so I can make the book totally myself. If you're an author, you have to pay for all that stuff. Something that some people, probably one of the biggest shocks for self-publishers is that they don't realize how much it costs. So let's say that you have a 30-page book and you want an illustration for each page, and you have to pay someone to illustrate that. That's 30 pages plus a cover that you have to pay for. And a lot of times people have not sat down and done the math about how much this is going to cost. It's like, what are you going to pay per page? You think you're going to pay someone $20 a page to illustrate your book? You might could find someone to do that, but I don't think you're going to be very happy with the results. I mean, you're going to pay at least $100 a page, at least. That's like the lowest I could think of. You're going to be paying thousands of dollars just to have it illustrated. And if you want to have an editor edit, you're going to have to pay them. The printing of the book is pretty expensive. You have to understand some business ideas too. So the idea of margin, it's like, how much are you making on each book? You don't want to pay $18 to have a book printed that you're going to sell for $2 because that makes no sense. You want to be able to double the price. You want to be able to print your book for, if you're going to sell it for $20, you want to print it for no more than 10, which means you got to buy a lot of books.
How much money did you put in this project from drafting to marketing?
Hey, I'll tell you what I paid on it. I don't mind.
Yeah.
So since I illustrated and did all this stuff, I pay $0 for my own work. So the illustration is $0 for me. The writing is $0. Editing is $0. I didn't pay an editor. The only thing I paid for, printing, literal printing. I bought, this latest book is hardback. That makes it a little more expensive. It's 30 pages. I bought 500 copies and I paid about $4,600 to have them printed and shipped.
$4,600. So for how many copies again?
500 copies.
So 500 copies. So that is how much per copy roughly?
It's about it. The books ended up costing about $9 and something per copy, and then you add the shipping and whatever it was on top of that.
So $9 and
it's somewhere between $9 and $10 per book is how it worked out.
Okay. And then what were some of the expenses you had to pay for marketing besides, of course, gas going to places and so forth?
Yeah. If you want to make signage of any kind, like, you want to make a vinyl banner or you want to print some I did print some bookmarks and I spent, about, I don't know, $75 printing bookmarks that I handed out. If you want to go to fairs or events, there's almost always an entry fee. It's going to be, $40, $50, $60, $70, $100, whatever it is. Unless you have a friend or whatever, then you just get in. So I've done some of those and you pay for that sometimes. If you have a website, you're going to pay for the domain name and you're going to pay for the website. Now that can cost you a couple bucks. Again, pay someone to make it for you and that's kind of expensive. I make it myself. I don't make websites for other people, but I do make mine. So I use Wix. And I think I pay $350 a year because it has a store. You have to pay extra if you're going to have a store on your site, which is too much. I think that's way too much. I need to rethink that. You should be prepared to give some stuff out for free. if it makes sense. I did do a giveaway on the radio.
Mhm.
I wasn't sure. We live in like in a post-radio society. Like, I don't know if it makes any sense to use the radio. Maybe it does where you live. I don't know. I used the local radio station. They gave away 10 books, and I didn't see that it helped me very much. I will say this though, giveaways can be awesome because I've done giveaways one-on-one, like Facebook or something like that. We're like, I'm going to give a book away, have people comment, you draw names out of a hat and you pick one, and then other people will buy the book that didn't win the book.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question I didn't write down, which is, did you have to set up a special sort of entity like a S corp or a LLC to kind of complete this process?
I really thought about it. I have a business. Well, I'm a sole proprietor. I'm not an LLC, but I do business anyway. So I just use that for my books.
Okay. And then one of my questions was, how did you determine the price of your book? But, talking about printing,
Yeah.
that kind of helped. It must set the price for that book.
Rule of thumb is double it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And plus I knew I wanted to just about double it. And I was trying to find what other books cost, that were similar to what I was doing. So picture books about the same size, hardback, they're about 17 to 20 bucks. So I thought I was right in the zone.
Just ask a very blunt question. Have you made a
Sure.
profit?
I've not made back the printing costs yet. No, I have not. Not on this book.
Okay. And
but I just started selling it too. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What patterns have you seen in your sales?
Patterns. Well, I'll tell you one of the most important pattern is if you don't do anything, you don't sell any books. So you got to get out there and do stuff, because what's funny is sometimes the sales are indirect. So you'll go to an event, you're like, wow, this was a total bust, but you meet somebody and that turns into you selling books somehow. So you can't predict what's going to happen. The best thing you can do is just get out there and do stuff.
We have a lot of writers interested in self-publishing. You mentioned that you might say, turn them away from it. Let's say someone's insistent they want to self-publish. They feel like that's the best way to publish their book. What is your number one recommendation about self-publishing?
Number one, I think, is to just know what you're trying to do. So a lot of people just want to make a book and maybe give some to their family and friends. Nothing in the world wrong with that. Some people want to sell a lot of books. Some people might have the idea that they want to actually make a living from it one day. I think one of the best things you can do is just be clear on what you're doing, and then act accordingly. So if you're just doing it for fun, just do it for fun. But if you're trying to treat it like a long-term thing, a business thing, start learning how to market, start learning how to sell books, get out there and learn how to be creative or consistent. Well, creative is good too. Learn how to consistently talk about your book and to consistently work on new material and expect it to just last, I don't know, forever. Just make it a thing that you do from then on.